The girl was chained to a wooden post. Her long dress was torn to shreds and stiff with dried blood. Mud clung thickly to the hem of her skirt and her knees. Her bare feet touched the freezing ground. A heavy iron chain was locked around her ankle, pulling tight every time she moved. Dark bruises circled her wrists. On the other side of the stable, a few drunken men were laughing loudly. "This one is still worth something. Let's wait until tonight and see who bids higher." The girl did not react. She only sat, curled into herself, her back against the wooden post, her eyes red and swollen from crying too much. Just then, the stable door creaked open. A man stepped inside. His coat was covered in dust, and a wide-brimmed hat shadowed half of his face. He was just a cowboy passing through town to buy an old horse. His name was Marcus Hale. Marcus walked past the rows of stalls. Then he heard the faint rattle of an iron chain. He stopped. His eyes shifted toward the dark corner of the stable. When Marcus stepped closer, the girl flinched and pressed herself back against the wooden post, like an animal cornered in a trap. Her eyes were full of panic. Then her voice broke, hoarse with despair. "No one wants me." A tear rolled down her cheek. She looked at Marcus as if she were looking at the last chance of her life. "Please, take me with you." Marcus stood motionless in the cold stable, because he knew one thing very clearly. If he stepped into this situation, he might end up facing the entire town. "Thank you for being here tonight. I would really love to know how far this story has traveled, so let me know where you are watching from. And if you would like to continue the journey with me, you can subscribe to the channel." Marcus Hale did not say a word. He simply stood there in the dark stable, surrounded by the smell of damp straw and the sharp scent of whiskey drifting in from the men outside. The girl kept looking at him. Her eyes were no longer begging. There was only a deep, endless exhaustion. As if she had asked that question too many times in her life, and the answer had always been the same. Marcus turned away. He walked out of the stable. The wooden door closed behind him, the hinges groaning dryly. Outside, the cold wind swept hard across the yard. A few horses in the nearby stalls gave soft whinnies. Marcus passed the old auction counter, where two men were drinking whiskey and laughing. One of them glanced at him. "Looking to buy a horse?" Marcus did not answer. He just kept walking. But when he reached the ranch gate, he stopped. In his mind, he could still hear the girl's hoarse voice. "No one wants me." Marcus tightened his grip on the brim of his hat. Then he stepped out onto the road. The street of Silver Butte was almost empty in the winter night. The wind pushed trails of snow-dusted dirt along the old wooden porches. Marcus tied his horse outside the inn. He was about to go in and rent a room. But when his hand touched the door handle, he froze. An old memory suddenly surfaced. Many years ago, another town, another girl. He had seen her being dragged across the town square. He had heard her cry for help, and he had done nothing. Marcus closed his eyes for a second. The wind blew harder. He turned around. Without saying a word, Marcus walked back to his horse, untied the rope, and swung up into the saddle. The horse turned toward the auction ranch. The stable was still dark. The men were drunk now. One of them had fallen asleep against a wooden barrel. Marcus tied his horse behind the fence. Then he stepped quietly inside. The faint rattle of iron chains sounded as the girl shifted slightly. She was still sitting there, leaning against the wooden post. When she saw Marcus return, her eyes widened for a moment, but the suspicion quickly returned. "What did you come back for?" she asked softly. Marcus did not answer. He pulled a small knife from his belt. The girl immediately shrank back. "Don't." Marcus knelt beside her ankle. The knife touched the rusted lock of the chain. He studied it for a second, then said in a low voice, "Stay quiet." The knife could not cut the lock. Marcus stood up. He stepped outside the stable. A few minutes later, he returned with a pair of iron pliers from the ranch tool table. He clamped them tightly around the lock. Metal screeched. The lock snapped open. The heavy chain dropped onto the dirt floor with a dull, heavy thud. The girl stared at her ankle, as if she could not believe what had just happened. Marcus held out his hand to her. "Get up." The girl looked at that hand for a long time, and finally, she took it. The girl stood up very slowly. Her bare feet trembled as they touched the cold dirt floor of the stable. After many days chained to the wooden post, her body barely had any strength left. Marcus was still holding her hand. "Can you walk?" he asked. The girl nodded. But the moment she took a step, her knees buckled beneath her. Marcus did not say anything. He bent down, slipped an arm around her back, and lifted her up into his arms. The girl startled. "Don't." Marcus spoke only a few short words. "If you want to leave this place, stay quiet." The girl said nothing more. Marcus carried her out of the dark stable. Outside, the cold wind swept across the yard. A thin layer of snow covered the old wooden fences. Marcus's horse, tied behind the fence, gave a soft whinny when it saw him. Marcus placed the girl in the saddle first, then climbed up behind her. "Hold on," he said. The girl grabbed a handful of the horse's mane. At that moment, loud laughter came from the drinking table inside the ranch. A drunken man stumbled out into the yard. Marcus pulled the brim of his hat lower. The horse began walking slowly toward the ranch gate. The drunken man squinted at them. "Hey, friend, where are you going?" Marcus did not answer. The horse passed through the gate. Only after they had left the ranch behind and the town road began to fade in the distance did Marcus urged the horse to move faster. The night wind cut sharply across the hills. The girl curled into herself from the cold. After a while, she asked softly, "Where are you taking me?" Marcus looked ahead at the dark road in front of them. Out of Silver Butte. She fell silent. Only the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves echoed along the frozen dirt road. After a moment, she spoke again, quietly. "You do not know who I am," Marcus replied. "I do not need to. You also do not know what they will do if they catch me." Marcus did not answer right away. After a moment, he said, "I probably do." The girl turned her head to look at him. The distant lights of the town slowly disappeared behind the dark hills. The wind grew colder as they climbed higher. The girl shivered. Marcus took off his thick coat and draped it over her shoulders. She froze. For many months, no one had touched her without some cruel intention behind it. But the man behind her was doing only one thing, keeping her from freezing to death. After a while, she spoke softly. "My name is Clara." Marcus kept his eyes on the dark road ahead. "Marcus." She repeated the name very quietly. "Marcus." Ahead of them, through the darkness and falling snow, a small wooden cabin appeared on the slope of Silver Butte. That was the home of Marcus Hale, and Clara did not yet know that. When she stepped inside that cabin, her life would never be the same. The horse stopped in front of the small wooden cabin on the slope of Silver Butte. The night wind blew hard through the dry pine trees, carrying a biting cold. Marcus jumped down first. He helped Clara down from the saddle. The moment her feet touched the ground, her knees buckled again. Marcus caught her before she could fall. "Just a few more steps," he said, in a low voice. Clara did not answer. She only nodded weakly. Marcus opened the cabin door. A rush of cold air poured into the dark room. He quickly started the fire in the fireplace. Dry logs began to catch. An orange light flickered across the old wooden walls. Clara stood near the door. She did not step inside right away. Her eyes moved slowly around the room. A simple wooden bed, a rough table, 2 old chairs, a rifle leaning against the wall. Nothing luxurious, but it did not look like a place meant to imprison someone either. Marcus placed a thick blanket over one of the chairs. "Sit down." Clara remained standing. Her eyes were full of suspicion. "What did you bring me here for?" she asked. Marcus did not look at her. He hung his coat on a wooden hook, so you would not freeze to death out there. Clara let out a quiet laugh. A dry, hollow laugh. "That is what they said at the horse ranch, too." Marcus stopped moving. He turned and looked at her for the first time since they had entered the cabin. There was no anger in his eyes, only weariness. "You can leave if you want." Clara lifted her head. "Into the snow?" Marcus gave a small shrug. "That is your choice." Silence filled the room. Finally, Clara walked to the chair. She sat down very slowly. Marcus poured water into an iron pot and set it on the stove. A few minutes later, he brought over a bowl of hot soup and placed it on the table. "Eat." Clara looked at the bowl. She did not touch it. "You are not going to ask me?" she said. Marcus frowned slightly. "Ask what?" "You just brought a girl who was chained in a horse stable back to your home. Do you not want to know what happened?" Marcus sat down in the chair across from her. The firelight reflected in his eyes. "No." Clara looked surprised. Marcus continued, his voice calm. "That story belongs to you, not to me." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then finally she picked up the spoon. Her hand trembled slightly as she brought the soup to her lips. After a while she spoke softly. "I thought you would want something." Marcus looked up. "Something like what?" Clara did not answer. She only looked down at the bruises around her wrists. Marcus understood. He stood up, took the thick blanket, and placed it gently over her shoulders. "Get some sleep," he said. Clara sat there for a long time, inside the flickering firelight of the small cabin. For the first time in many months, there was no sound of a door locking behind her. The next morning, Clara woke as the pale light of winter drifted through the cabin window. For the first few seconds, she did not remember where she was. Then she saw the low wooden ceiling, smelled the faint smoke of burning firewood, and heard the quiet sound of a knife tapping against a wooden cutting board. Marcus was standing by the table. He was slicing dried meat. Clara slowly sat up. The blanket slipped from her shoulders. Marcus did not turn around. "You slept almost 12 hours, he said. Clara did not reply. She looked around the room as if confirming that everything from last night had not been a dream. No chains, no wooden post, no drunken men, only a quiet cabin surrounded by snowy mountains. Marcus placed a plate of bread on the table. "Eat." Clara stepped down from the bed. Her legs still hurt, but they were no longer pulled down by the weight of a heavy chain. She sat at the table. After a moment, she spoke softly. "They will look for me." Marcus continued cutting the meat. "I figured they would." Clara looked at him. "You do not understand." Marcus set the knife down. For the first time that morning, he looked directly at her. "Then help me understand." Clara was silent for a long time. Then she said, "The man at the auction ranch. His name is Briggs." She swallowed. "He does not only sell horses." Marcus said nothing. Clara continued, "He sells everything." Her eyes drifted far away. "I tried to escape 3 times. Every time, they caught me." She looked down at her hands. "This time, they said if I run again." Her sentence stopped there. Marcus did not press her to finish. After a moment, Clara spoke in a very quiet voice. "They will kill me." The cabin fell into silence. Outside, the wind pushed hard through the pine forest. Marcus stood up. He walked to the window. He looked down the narrow road that led up the hill. After a moment, he said, "Silver Butte is about 10 miles from here." Clara did not understand. Marcus turned back. "If they want to find you, they will start in town." Clara looked at him. "And if they find me here?" Marcus gave a small shrug. "Then they will have to climb the hill." She watched him for a long moment. "You are not afraid?" Marcus walked to the wall where the rifle leaned. He lifted it and checked the chamber. "No," Clara whispered. "There are 3 of them." Marcus closed the chamber again. "That is good." Clara looked up. Marcus spoke calmly. "I do not like long conversations." That afternoon, the sky over Silver Butte hung heavy with gray clouds. Snow-laden wind swept through the pine forest, scattering thin sheets of ice along the hillside. Clara was sitting near the fireplace when Marcus suddenly froze beside the window. He did not say anything. He simply stared down the road that led up the hill. Clara noticed immediately. "Someone?" she asked quietly. Marcus did not turn around. 3. She jumped to her feet. Her heart pounded so hard it nearly stole her breath. Marcus kept looking outside. Far down the snow-covered road, 3 riders were making their way up the hill. Clara stepped back. "It is them." Her voice trembled. Marcus turned to her. "You are sure?" Clara nodded. "The man in front, that is Briggs." Just hearing the name made her throat feel dry. Marcus did not say another word. He walked to the gun rack, took the rifle, checked the ammunition once more. The dry click of metal echoed through the quiet cabin. Clara watched him. "You still have time." Marcus looked up. "For what?" "To leave." She spoke faster now. "You do not owe me anything." Marcus simply looked at her. Clara continued, "If they find me here, they will kill you." Marcus rested the rifle against his shoulder. "Maybe." Clara stepped closer. Her eyes were almost desperate. "Marcus, please, do not do this because of me." Silence filled the cabin. Marcus looked out the window one more time. The 3 riders were already halfway up the slope. He turned back, looked straight at Clara. "Do you want to go back with them?" The question left Clara stunned. "No," she said immediately. Marcus nodded. "Then stay behind me." Clara froze. Marcus pulled the cabin door open. Snowy wind rushed inside at once. He stepped onto the wooden porch. The rifle rested steady in his hands. The 3 riders stopped about 30 steps from the cabin. The man in front spat into the snow. "Briggs." He looked at Marcus, then at the cabin behind him. "We are just here to take back what belongs to us," he shouted. Marcus stood still. The wind lifted the edge of his coat. "There is nothing here that belongs to you," Marcus replied. Briggs let out a mocking laugh. "Oh, there is." He pointed straight at the cabin. "That girl." One of the two men behind him drew a revolver. "Just hand her over, and I will pretend we never met." Marcus did not move. After a moment, he spoke calmly. "I think you should ride back down that hill." The three men glanced at each other. Then Briggs burst out laughing. "Listen, Cowboy, we are not asking for your opinion." He nudged his horse forward a step. "We came to take her." Marcus slowly raised the rifle. "Try it." Snowy wind screamed across the slope of Silver Butte. Marcus stood on the cabin porch, the rifle steady in his hands. The three riders below had stopped their horses. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Clara stood behind the cabin door, which was slightly open. She looked through the narrow gap, her hands trembling. Briggs narrowed his eyes at Marcus. "I will say this one last time," he growled. "Hand the girl over." Marcus did not move. "No." The man on Briggs's right gave a small laugh. "Sounds like a hero." He pulled out a revolver. Marcus spoke immediately. "Do not." But it was already too late. The man raised the gun. A shot exploded across the hillside. The bullet grazed the wooden post of the cabin porch. Marcus pulled the trigger almost at the same moment. The rifle cracked even louder. The man who had fired was thrown backward out of the saddle and fell into the snow. His horse jumped sideways in panic. Briggs drew his gun instantly. He fired back. 2 bullets slammed into the cabin wall. Marcus stepped sideways along the porch, avoiding the line of fire. He chambered another round. The second rider jumped off his horse and took cover behind a large rock. Briggs shouted, "Kill him!" The man fired 2 more shots. Bullets struck the wooden railing. Marcus waited, just for a moment. When the man leaned out to aim again, Marcus's rifle fired. The bullet hit the man in the shoulder. He rolled into the snow, screaming in pain. Now only Briggs remained. He looked at the 2 men lying in the snow. The anger in his eyes slowly turned cold. Briggs slowly lifted his gaze toward Marcus. "Listen, Cowboy, this is not your business." Marcus chambered another round. "It is now." Briggs glanced at the cabin behind Marcus. He knew Clara was inside. "That girl is not worth this." Marcus did not answer. Briggs tightened his grip on the gun. Then he laughed. A cold laugh. "Fine." Slowly, he lowered the gun. Marcus did not lower his rifle. Briggs turned his horse. "This is not over." He spurred the horse and rode down the slope. The sound of hooves quickly faded into the snowy wind. Marcus remained standing on the porch. Only after a long moment did he lower the rifle. The cabin door opened. Clara stepped outside. She looked at the bullet holes in the wooden wall. She looked at the 2 men lying motionless in the snow. Then she looked at Marcus. Her voice trembled. "You could have died." Marcus leaned the rifle against the wall. "Maybe." Clara looked at him for a long time. A tear slid down her cheek. "No one has ever done that for me." Marcus gave a small shrug. "Then I guess you have only met bad people." Clara began to cry. But this time, it was not from despair. After the confrontation on the hillside, Silver Butte fell into quiet days. The 2 men who had ridden with Briggs were buried by Marcus at the edge of the pine forest behind the cabin. Not out of mercy, but because he did not want their bodies lying there and attracting wild animals. Clara helped him. At first, she only stood and watched, but then she picked up a shovel. The winter ground was hard as stone, and every strike of the shovel felt heavy. After a while, Marcus said, "You do not have to do that." Clara shook her head. "Yes, I do." It was the first time she had done something that was not forced upon her. In the days that followed, the snow kept falling, but the cabin no longer felt as cold as before. Clara began doing small things. She fixed the curtains by the window. She swept away the dust inside the cabin. She found an old dress in Marcus's wooden chest and carefully stitched it back together for herself. Marcus did not ask about it, but he noticed the cabin changing little by little. There was an extra cup on the table, a pair of dry shoes by the door, and someone who no longer flinched every time the door opened. One morning near the end of winter, Clara stood at the cabin door looking down into the valley. The sun shone through the snow that was beginning to melt. She spoke quietly. "I did not think I would live to see spring." Marcus stood behind her. "Well, now you will have to think differently." Clara turned around. The despair that once lived in the eyes of the girl chained in the horse stable was gone. Only calm remained. Sometime later, Marcus rode down to town with 2 horses. Clara went with him. Silver Butte looked at them with curious eyes. Rumors of the gunfight on the hill had spread through the town, but no one said anything. Marcus bought wood, salt, and seeds. Clara stood beside him, no longer lowering her head the way she once had. When they returned to the cabin, the snow had begun melting along the hillside. One early spring afternoon, Marcus stood beneath the large pine tree in front of the cabin. Clara was hanging blankets in the sunlight. Marcus watched her for a long moment. Then he said, "Clara." She turned. Marcus walked toward her. He was not good at saying big things, but he said it anyway. "If you want, you can stay here." Clara smiled softly. "Marcus, I am already here." The spring wind moved gently through the pine forest. The small cabin on the hill above Silver Butte was no longer the home of a lonely cowboy. It had become a place of belonging. And for the first time in many years, Marcus Hale was not living alone. "My friend, some chains are made of iron. They are cold, heavy, and everyone can see them. But there are other chains, far more dangerous. They are made from fear. From the silence of those who stand and watch. From the belief that a human being can be bought, owned, or discarded like an object." Clara was once tied to a wooden post inside a horse stable. But the thing that nearly broke her was not the chain around her ankle. It was the moment she began to believe that no one in this world wanted her. And that is the most terrifying prison a person can face. The moment they begin to believe they have no value. Marcus was not a hero. He did not arrive with thunderous gunfire or grand declarations. He simply did one small thing, something many people in that town had refused to do. He did not turn away. Sometimes the world does not need great figures to change history. It only needs one person to stop, to see someone else's pain, and to decide, no, this cannot continue. A door is opened. A chain is removed. A human being is treated like a human being. And from actions that seem so small, an entirely new life can begin. Because in the end, what saves people is not strength, but the courage to refuse to turn away from what is wrong. The story contains many fictional elements, constructed with the aid of artificial intelligence. The characters and events do not represent any specific person or historical event. All of it aims to recreate the harsh atmosphere of the Wild West, where the law is sometimes in the hands of the strong, and every choice has its price. If there is anything true, it is the lessons about honor, compassion, and courage in the face of adversity. Once again, I truly appreciate you staying with me until this moment. If this story meant something to you, please leave a comment with the number 1 so I know you are listening. And if it feels right to you, you can subscribe to the channel so we can meet again in the next story.